Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different traditions in college football, including the whiteout and the Army-Navy game, and how they're going to be just a little bit different than they have been in past years, and definitely not what we want. But we'll hopefully figure out more about the whiteout. It seems like the Army-Navy one is set in stone at this point. But let's move on to the transfer portal, and let's talk about who really won the transfer portal. There's a lot of talk around the transfer portal around pretty much the entire year, let's be totally honest, but especially over the last couple of months, it's been absolutely crazy. It's been all over the place, tons of players going every which way, decommitting from teams they've committed to and going to a different school. It's all over the place, and it's really hard to keep track of, but CBS and Brandon Marcello did us all a huge favor, and they put together a little bit of a better way to understand who actually won the portal and who didn't, and it's by net rating gain, which is essentially just the average rating of the player that you lost compared to the average player of the rating that you brought in. So some teams are very positive. Obviously, the Power 4 teams, a large amount of them are going to be in the positive because they likely get guys from the group of five stages from different parts of the sport where they have a little bit more ability to bring in the top level guys. So I want to go conference by conference and give you a couple of ideas of who really won, who really lost. We're going to give the top five and the bottom five from every conference and give you guys an idea of maybe there's some ones that you didn't expect. Maybe there's some ones that don't necessarily match up with what you thought. And they're definitely hard for me. So I want to start breaking this down for you guys. And I think the most interesting thing when we start with the ACC in particular, Florida State and NC State leading the way is not all that surprising to me. You know, they added new quarterbacks, they added a running back one, they added a big time wide receiver at both those places. So you're obviously going to have, a very good portal class when you're able to add those big time positions, especially Florida State, where you didn't really lose, too much in Tate Rodemaker from the transfer portal. Bringing in DJ is obviously going to be a win in that category. And then you have teams like Boston College, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and I think some of that is just a testament to who they have at head coach. I think a lot of the fit between those three colleges is almost perfect with the three guys that they have there. Bill O'Brien obviously had the very interesting, week saga at Ohio State as their offensive coordinator before making his way over to Boston College, and I think he's done a great job of just being the Boston College head coach. It feels like he fits perfectly there. It feels like that's where he's meant to be, and definitely going to be a huge asset for them going forward. So very, very interesting. I feel like he's been doing a really good job there. Brent Key at Georgia Tech is another guy to watch. I think he's one of the more underrated coaches in the entire country, if I'm being totally honest. He's building something down at Tech that feels like it's sustainable. It feels like it's not just going to be a flash in the pan program. They're going to play really good football pretty much every single week, and as long as they start to figure out that defense down there, it'll be fascinating to watch that team grow and grow throughout the years. And then you have Fran Brown down at Syracuse. He did absolute work in the portal, and they lost a ton of guys, but they brought in even more talented guys, including Kyle McCord was definitely the big coup of that transfer portal class. So a lot of really talented groups in this top five for the ACC. I think it's a lot of what you would expect, some of what you didn't expect, with Georgia Tech being in there, maybe Syracuse being in there, Boston College maybe shocked you, but the bottom five is really where the story is, in my opinion. I think Pittsburgh and Duke are not all that surprising. I'm a little surprised they're on the negative side, particularly Duke, with adding someone like Malik Murphy and doing some of the things they did, but when you lose someone like Jordan Waters at running back, it's going to be hard to replace that type of talent. So it's not necessarily the craziest thing in the world, not necessarily too wild one way or the other, but those two teams at the bottom isn't crazy surprising to me. Neither is Stanford by any means. I think they're never necessarily going to be big-time power players in the transfer portal. They could be, solid and fill gaps where they need to, but they're never going to be up there with the Florida States, the North Carolinas, the NC States of the world, likely. But then Miami and Virginia Tech are the two that I really want to zero in on. Miami is very interesting because when you look at the transfer portal classes, they added some big-time players, and it felt like they had a lot rolling down there. Maybe not as much as we might think. They definitely lost some big-time guys as well. So it seemed to be, a huge big-time class for Miami, and I still think they got some really big-time players for them. But they lost some guys as well. And then Virginia Tech feels like it's a little bit more circumstantial than Miami. It feels like it's some of just, a lot of guys came back and they absolutely like the group that they have. So they're not necessarily going to be towards the top of this list. They did bring in a couple of really good guys, but they don't necessarily need to do a lot of work. And then Clemson wasn't included in this because they lost 12 guys, they added 0. So not a ton to break down there. But the Big Ten is a very interesting group as well. Ohio State and Purdue's numbers are insane. They are far above pretty much everyone else in the Power 5. In fact, Nebraska, I think, is number 4. So the Big Ten did absolute work in the portal. Ohio State is very obvious. Caleb Downs, Seth McLaughlin, Quinshon Judkins. When you add those guys, it's going to be incredible. I mean, they had 25 guys leave, only 7 come in, and that's how well they did. So it's just incredible what they were able to do in the portal. Purdue doing incredible things, even losing guys like Nick Scourton and Deion Burks, adding guys like Nyland Green, Denylon Morissette, CJ Smith from UGA. All of those guys are hugely important. So I think Ryan Walters is starting to do what he's going to have to do up there in West Lafayette to win some football games. And then you get to Nebraska, Iowa. Definitely Nebraska had a very good class. Isaiah Nader, Jamal Banks, Dante Dowdle, a ton of really, really big players for them. And then Iowa, it's really just, giving Tim Lester more offensive talent to work with. And then Oregon, we all know, did an awesome job, brought in some really big-time players there. Michigan losing some guys like Keon Saab, Jeremiah Beasley definitely did not help them be on the wrong side of this list right here. On the negative side, actually, for this portal class. Not necessarily overly surprising, but definitely something that Michigan is going to have to, be a little bit worried about. I think Indiana being on the wrong side of this is a little bit surprising to me. They did lose some big-time players like Kobe Minor, but at the end of the day, brought in a ton of big-time players as well. CJ West from Kent State, brought in a ton of JMU guys, obviously with Kurt Signetti coming over. So there's a ton to like about that team. UCLA is going to have to be a bigger factor in the portal going forward if they really want to be a big player in the Big Ten. So a ton to break down in the Big Ten. The two really setting the pace here are Ohio State and Purdue, and it's by a comfortable margin. Let's just put it that way. But let's move over to the Big 12, and BYU leading the way here at 3.16. Definitely a little bit surprising. Utah, I think, did great work. They're number 2 in this conference and brought in guys like Dorian Singer, Tayshawn Lyons. So did great job of adding some guys. BYU adding Jerry Bohannon, who is likely their starter at quarterback, definitely helped this a ton and likely didn't lose a ton of guys if you're BYU. So very helpful for them. Kansas and Kansas State continue to build out that Big 12 contender teams. They are top 5 in this as well. So Kansas State bringing in guys like Dylan Edwards was the big-time win. And then Kansas' big-time win was by Jobe, the edge rusher from Michigan State. So a lot of really, really good work there. Cincinnati being in the top 10 is huge for them. Brendan Sorsby coming in is absolutely huge. Definitely will be their starter at quarterback. So Scott Satterfield is doing exactly what he has to do at Cincinnati if he wants to be a player in the Big 12. And then you go to the wrong side of this list and you have Arizona being in the positive is actually wild. Losing the number of players that they did, still being able to be on the right side of this is very helpful. Obviously in the lower side of the conference, but when you lose a coach like Jed Fish, you're likely going to be. But it's really more important the guys that didn't enter for them. Noah Fafita, Totori McMillan, the guys that really are the engine for this team not going in is the biggest win. And then you have Arizona State, likely needs to be bigger players in the portal going forward if they want to be big-time players. Same thing with Houston, definitely kind of a UCLA type situation there. TCU and Iowa State being at the bottom is a little bit just, they return a lot of guys. TCU not quite as much. Iowa State is just, they're comfortable where they're at. I'll be totally honest with you. And it's just kind of TCU, that's the game they play. They're going to lose a lot of guys. They're going to gain a lot of guys every single year. They came out a little bit on the negative side this year, but definitely still a ton of really good players they brought in. And then finally, let's move to the SEC, and it's Texas leading the way here. I don't think that's too much of a surprise. Adding the wide receiver D-line talent that they did is obviously going to help this out a ton. So adding guys like Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden is absolutely a huge part of this. Missouri number 2, bringing in Caden Green is one of the biggest pickups of the entire portal cycle. So that totally makes sense to me. You also have Tennessee and Ole Miss at 3 and 4. Both these teams did a great job of assessing weaknesses and addressing those in big ways. I think think Tennessee did a great job of addressing the defense and the offensive line with Lance Hurd coming in. I think Ole Miss did a great job of addressing pretty much the entirety of that defense this offseason. So obviously a great class for them. And then Georgia bringing in guys like Colby Young, London Humphreys, Xavier McLeod was all good enough to get them number 5 in the conference. And then you go to the bottom 5, and the absolute bottom is Bama. And I think that was likely going to happen. This was going to be a really, really tough portal cycle for them with Saban leaving. They lost 40 guys. They only brought in 15. So it was going to be an uphill battle. There's no two ways about that. Oklahoma and A&M being on this side of this is not necessarily ideal. They did kind of have an up and down cycle where you lost some big-time players. You brought in some big-time players. So kind of a, even loss there for Oklahoma and A&M, just a little bit in the positive direction. And then you have Mississippi State and Vandy towards the bottom here as well. That's likely where they're going to be in the SEC for quite some time. No disrespect to either of those schools, but you're really fighting an uphill battle now if you weren't before. So it's very interesting to look at these. I think a lot of times when you look at the transfer portal, you only look at the guys that are coming in, right? You only look at the big-time names that are going to Miami or Ohio State or wherever. But sometimes it doesn't necessarily even out with the players that are walking out of your program. So I think it's a really, really interesting thing to look at. Definitely something that will give us an idea of who actually won, who actually lost. As you probably already knew, Ohio State really won, along with Texas, along with Purdue, did a great job. So a ton of really good teams that definitely did a ton of work in the portal. So it'll be fascinating to watch that develop. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to start our little breakdown we've been doing the last couple of days, where we're going to do win totals for the Big Ten, and then we're going to do Cinderellas for the Big Ten. We did this yesterday with the SEC, if you want to go check that out, but definitely the Big Ten is just as interesting, if not more so. So I want to break that down right after this, so stick with us.